chapter 24. Continue on the Old Testament version of the Bachelor here. See who gets the road. Some of y'all know what Bachelor is? No? I don't know. That's all that matters. All right. We saw last week, at the beginning of chapter 24, that Abraham gives his servant again, but I'm not really sure who he is, but he's kind of the main dog in Abraham's house that kind of takes care of everything for him, and sends him to find his son Isaac alive. A couple of things just kind of quickly, this is a recap. He didn't want Isaac to marry a Canaanite woman, right? Even though they were there dwelling in the land of Canaan. What was the reason that Abraham wouldn't have wanted Isaac to have a Canaanite wife?
Pagan people. They were pagan, weren't they?
Yeah, they were pagan. Yeah, and he, living there in the land, and God had already promised the descendants of Abraham they were going to have the entirety of the land of Canaan, and he wanted to make sure that there was nothing else that kind of, Isaac marries into the Canaanite family, then he's going to get a dowry from their father and probably some land, and there would have been different ways in which Abraham would have gotten that land and not by the plan of God. And also they were pagan. They would have not been godly people at all. And he wanted to make sure that the line stayed true, because he had been told by God that his line was going to eventually take over the land of Canaan and it would be blessed through many, many generations. So Abraham had some very specific reasons as to why he wanted the servant to go back to his own people to find Isaac alive. We saw through the first 9 verses there of chapter 24. Abraham had some very, very specific instructions for his servant to go back and find a wife, and of course the servant wanted to take Isaac with him. Probably a good thing to have somebody there just kind of see, and not so much a blind betrothment. But Abraham had very specific instructions because he wanted to make sure that the wife came back, Isaac didn't go and stay. And then as we continue through chapter 24, we saw the servant, have some very specific instructions as he was praying to God about making sure he was picking the correct woman. Those instructions were the lady came, the young lady came and drew water, that she not only offered it to the servant, but to the camels as well. And as we went down through those 9 verses, then even on down through chapter 24, verses 25 or 26 or so, we see these things happening. We see the servant asking very, very specifically for God to reveal who this young lady should be, very specific things that needed to happen. And then we see, as we saw in verses 26 and 27 of chapter 24, that this servant hadn't even really stopped praying to God yet, and these things started happening right in front of his eyes. Some very, very kind of specific things that took place, and that's when we met Rebecca. And Rebecca was the young lady that came and drew water. As we saw, she went back several times to make sure that the camels had plenty of water. And the servant just watched this and asked who she was when she was done. And we find out down through verse 67. Actually, I think we stopped on verse 50 last week, and we see that. Actually, no, we stopped at verse 31. That's where I have it marked. Sorry. We stopped at verse 31, and we found out that Rebecca came, would have been kinship of Abraham. Rebecca's brother was Laban, and Laban comes out and meets Rebecca and this servant. And in verse 31 is where we finished up last week. Told him that come in and invite him to stay with him, and calling the servant blessed of the Lord. And we finished with saying that because this event happened here in verse 31, and let's look at it, chapter 24, verse 31. It says, and he said, Come in, thou blessed of the Lord, wherefore standest thou without? For I have prepared the house and bring for the camels. So we see Laban coming down and greeting this servant in his caravan. Come on, come blessed of the Lord. Does not mean that Laban believed in Jehovah. Okay? It does not mean that Laban believed in God, as we're going to see as this account kind of continues to carry on. But he and both his father, who is Bethuel, they were convinced that this guy showing up, Rebecca bringing them to the house, they were convinced that this had happened exactly as God had plainly dictated and directed it. Okay? As a matter of fact, if you look over to verse 50 of chapter 24, they actually say, Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, The thing proceedeth from the Lord. We cannot speak unto thee bad or good. Right? So God had spoken. He was doing. This whole event was his doing, and there was nothing more to be said about it. Okay? So let's go to verse 32 of chapter 24. Let's read down through verse 50. And we'll see this event kind of continuing to play out here. So again, beginning in verse 32, and we'll just read the account down through verse 50. Kind of see that even Bethuel here and Laban, who weren't fully invested in God, they understood that this event was God directed. Okay? And the man came into the house, and he girded his camels, and gave straws and provender for the camels, and waters to wash his feet, and the men's feet that were with him. And there was set meat before him to eat. But he said, I will not eat until I have told mine errand. And he said, Speak on. And he said, the servant speaking, Am I Abraham's servant? And the Lord hath blessed my master greatly, and he is become great, and he hath given him flocks and herds, and silver and gold, and men servants and maid servants, and camels and asses. And Sarah, my master's wife, bare sons to my master, for she was old. And unto him hath he given all that he hath. And my master made me swear, saying, Thou shalt not take a wife to my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I dwell. But thou shalt go to my father's house and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son. And I said unto my master, Peradventure, the woman will not follow me. Then he said unto me, The Lord, according to my law, will send his angels with thee, and prosper thy way, and thou shalt take a wife for my son of my kindred in my father's house. Then shalt thou be clear from this my oath, when they come to my kindred, and if they give not thee one, thou shalt be clear from my oath. And I came this day into the well and said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, if now thou do prosper my way which I go, behold, I stand by the well of water. And it shall come to pass that when the virgin cometh forth to draw water, and I say to her, Give me, I pray thee, a little drink of thy pitcher to drink, a little water of thy pitcher to drink. And she say to me, Both drink thou, and I will also draw for thy camels. Let the same be the woman who the Lord hath appointed out for my master's son. And before I had done speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came forth with a pitcher on her shoulder. And she went down to the well and drew water. And I said unto her, Let me drink, I pray thee. And she made haste, let down her pitcher from her shoulder, and said, Drink, and I will give thy camels drink also. So I drank, and made the camels drink also. And I asked her, she said, Whose daughter art thou? And she said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nabor's son, from whom Milcah bare unto him. And I put the earring upon her face, and bracelets upon her hand. And I bowed down my head, and worshipped the Lord, and blessed the Lord of God, my master Abraham, which had led me in the right way to take my master's brother's daughter to my son, to his son, excuse me. And now, if ye will deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me if not, tell me that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, The thing proceedeth from the Lord, we cannot speak unto thee bad or good. So here's the account from the servant. And once he hears everything and how he laid it out, they permit Rebekah here to marry Isaac. And I'm sure that if we had time today, you each and every one of you would probably give me maybe one, if not probably multiple examples that we were so convinced of God's will that we kind of thought the decision was already made. Right? It was so certain that God's will was going on that you know the decision was already made. I'm sure we all have multiple examples of that. As we continue to kind of go through this, we start to see some things kind of change a little bit. Verse 52, it came to pass that when Abraham's servant heard the words, he worshipped the Lord, bowing himself to the earth. And the servant brought forth jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment, and gave them to Rebekah. He gave also to her brother and to her brother precious things. They did eat and drink, and the men that were with him tarried all night, rose up in the morning, and said, Send me away unto my master. And her brother and her mother said, Let the damsel abide with us a few days, at the least 10. After that she shall go. And her brother and mother, and he said unto them, Hinder me not, seeing the Lord hath prospered my way. Send me away, that I may go to my master. And they said, We will call the damsel and inquire at her mouth. And when they called Rebekah and said unto her, Wilt thou go with this man? And she said, I will go. So Rebekah's, this arrangement, I guess, has been has happened. It's been satisfied. They said, yes, this is perfectly okay. Rebekah can go and marry Isaac, and then so the servant here, as we see, was worshiping God, thanking God for what is going on, thanking Him for allowing this to kind of work out in the way that it does. And he's ready to say, all right, this is it. Let's get Rebekah. Let's get her stuff up. And let me take her back to Abraham and to Isaac. Let her meet her soon-to-be husband. And then Rebekah's brother and her mother kind of step in as this guy as he's trying to leave, and they're wanting to delay the departure of Rebekah. As we see, though, the servant was very, very insistent on making sure that he left as soon as possible. Verse 58, right? Or verse 56, excuse me, he said, Seeing the Lord has prospered my way, I need to get at it. I need to get back to Abraham. I need to take her back to Isaac so that I can satisfy the oath that I have made unto Abraham. Right? This is my job. This is what I have to do. Abraham told me to do it as quick as possible. So this is what I'm trying to do. And Rebekah here, as we see in verse 58, and they called Rebekah and asked her, she wants to leave. And we see Rebekah saying, what? Yes, right? She's ready to go. Her decisiveness here begins to show the qualities of Rebekah, right? We see in some of the very early characteristics of who Rebekah is that she came in, she was a servant, making sure that the man had water, her camels had water, and she did it willingly and happily, so we kind of see a little bit of her character. And we see here, even in the second event, where she hears all this, and the mommy and big brother there were trying to get her to kind of hang around, and she says, no, I'm ready to go. She's very quick, she's very sure in her decision to go. It's just showing more of her own faith in God. Right? She hears this story. She hears the servant tell this story that God, he asked God for these specific things, and then she went and did these specific things. So she sees kind of we're seeing her own faith here in God. Knowing that His will, what He wanted, and His plan was very, very plainly evident on the events that had unfolded just previously. Okay? So she's ready to go. Now, the long trip back to Canaan, I'm sure, was filled with excitement and some anticipation and for some suspense for Rebekah. As she heads back, verse 59, they sent Rebekah away, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said unto her, Thou art our sister, be thou the mother of thousands, millions, and let thy seed possess the gate of those which hate them. And Rebekah arose, and her damsels, and they rode upon the camels, and they followed the man, the servants of Rebekah, and went his way. And Isaac came from the way of the well of Leharoy, for where he dwelt in the south country. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the eventide. And he lifted up his eyes, and saw, behold, the camels were coming. And Rachel lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she glided off the camel. So we have this trip back to Isaac. I'm sure there's 1,000 things going through Rebekah's mind. And finally, after this day's journey, she finally reaches her destination. And as she's coming up on the camel, and they're coming up over the hill, and kind of planes out the top of the hill, and she sees this man sitting out there in the field and meditating all by himself. And you see in verse 63 and 64, they lock eyes, right? They find each other and they lock eyes, and she sees him there. And as Isaac approaches Rebekah, there she puts this veil on herself before Isaac arrives there to greet her. Verses 65 and 65. Therefore she had said to her servant, "What man is this that walketh in the field to meet us?" And the servant had said, "Is my master." Therefore she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant, verse 66, told Isaac all the things that he had done. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted at his mother's death. So they go through, and sees her off in the distance, and he comes up on her, and he puts the veil over. And as we see that these two young people were married, and married very quickly. And they were strangers, and as of course they didn't really know each other. But as they grew older, and of course their love developed, and they continued to grow strong. So we see now that Isaac and Rebekah have now become man and wife, and the love is developing. Okay. All right. So we have a couple things here. That we see will versus will. And when we are humbly seeking to know God and humbly seeking to do what God wants for our lives, or do what God leads, God's will leads to us. It leads to blessings. It leads to contentment. And it leads to joy. And I always like to say it leads to freedom. We have freedom in serving God. We know that God is totally and entirely in control. There's nothing we really worry about or need to do about it, right? That's just kind of the way this thing works. And it's what happens here. We see this account for the servant and for Rebekah and for Isaac and these guys here. They were doing what God had instructed, so they knew that with them being within the will of God, there were going to be blessings there and joy in it. Okay? All right, now let's jump down to chapter 25. Let's jump down to verse 20. And we've seen sensitivity to God's will in the first part of this lesson. And now we're going to see some insensitivity to God's will through the last part of this. If you read down chapter 25 down through verse 20, where we're going to kind of jump to. If you read down, we see that Sarah dying, we see Abraham dying, we see the kids that were bare as well. A lot of, as Pastor Rob says, Bubba begat, so on and so forth. So we'll kind of just kind of skip over that to get to verse 20, which is where this begins to see kind of the second part of this. When we start with verse 20, and let's read down through verse 29 to kind of set the stage here for we're going to see some of the insensitivity to the will. Now Isaac at this point, 40 years old, when he married Rebekah, and as we're going to see here, starting in verse 20, they are confidently awaiting the birth of an heir. Okay, as we know, many years later, right, he's still waiting. He knew God had promised the land of Canaan to his descendants, but he was curious about when he would first see, this descendant show up. So kind of the same thing that Abraham did. He's going to have to wait a 4 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, a Syrian of Padanaram, sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elders shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare him. So we see now that Isaac married 40, and it took 20 years before he finally begins to see these descendants. And what we have here in verse 25 is the first recorded version of twins. Okay, I'm sure there were other twins and other things that happened before this. This is the first actual recorded we see in scriptures of twins. So these descendants came, these twins showed up 20 years later, and Isaac remained faithful. He remained confident in God through those 20 years, remained confident that the Lord was going to be true to his promise, because he had seen these promises that God had promised Abraham, and how Abraham had been so faithful to God, even in the midst of kind of this not showing up for some time. And I'm sure that before Abraham died, and as he was aging and teaching Isaac these things, I'm sure the story was told, the lesson was taught many, many times about how Isaac had been waiting for many, many years, and how God had been faithful to Abraham, being faithful to him. So Isaac, in his own right here, knew God had promised that, knew God would fulfill his promise, and knew that God, the fulfillment of these promises that God had said was just completely a matter of his grace and of his power. Okay, so when Rebekah was pregnant, when she finally became pregnant, she had been barren for quite some time, she felt a rather unusual movement within her, that as we saw in verse 21 there, 22, she actually goes to God and asks him that this is different than what maybe some of the other women that she knew kind of talked about. So she goes to the Lord and asks him about it. In verses 21 down through 23, we see the Lord tell her that she is carrying twins, and that these twins would in fact become 2 separate nations, and that these twins would also separate from one another. He also tells her, as we see in verse 23, and 2 nations are in thy womb, 2 manner of people shall be separated from the bowels, and the one shall be stronger than the other people. And the last part of this says what? That the elder shall do what? Shall serve the younger. Okay, now, is that common for families during this time here? Absolutely not, right? We know this is important, and we know why this is important. I'm going to make sure I make the point. The firstborn, even if they were twins, the firstborn of the 2 twins would have been the one that would get the blessing, would have been the one that kind of in charge of things, the family moving forward. So the fact that the Lord told her while these 2 young babies were still in her womb, that the younger one would be, the older one, would be serving the younger one, that means something, right? It's very important that just, it's only 4 words, but it's very important that is there, because that is quite a bit different. We see verse 27, as we can begin to see the first twins being talked about here. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So the parents named the firstborn Esau. And Esau means, anybody know what Esau actually means? Hair. Yeah, it actually means hair. As we saw when he was born, and he was just covered in his red hair. Right? He came out being very, very hairy. So it kind of makes sense. There's a hairy baby. Let's name him Esau. And Esau means hairy. And the name of the second one was Jacob. And do we know what Jacob means? Anybody know? Let's think about what we've read and how Isaac and Rebekah named these kids. What did Jacob do when he was born?
Rescue
Grab you by the heels. You know what Jacob means? Heel grabber. That's literally what it means. Okay, so they named Esau here and Jacob heel grabber because that's the first exposing that they had to do at the time. Makes sense to me. As he grasped Esau's heel when they arrived. Now, as we see down through verse 27, Esau became a skillful hunter, lived out in the fields, and Jacob was a quiet man living in his tents. And we see kind of how they're partial to these children as well. Isaac more partial to Esau because he liked to eat the venison that he killed. And Rebekah more partial to Jacob because he spent more time with her in the tents doing some of the stuff that she was doing there as well. Okay, so Jacob and Esau, we've met and kind of see what's kind of going on here with, okay, verse 29 down through verse 34. As we'll see, Jacob connives to ensure God's will. Verse 29. And Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field and was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob sware to me this day, and he sware unto him, and sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now there's 5 little verses here, but pretty major implications on some things kind of going forward. Let's talk about this and see where we'll finish at for today. Esau shows up, okay, and of course he's been on a hunting trip. Probably been gone for quite some time. It wasn't just a regular one day. Get up in the morning, come back in the evening. Probably been gone for several days, out camping, different things, maybe weeks. And as he's coming back from a trip, he sees Jacob there boiling some red pottage. You can see verse 29 and 30. And he comes to Jacob and asks him of the soup or the pottage because he was so faint with hunger. Now, just by the way we read this, Esau, he thinks he's going to pass out or die because he's not eaten anything in quite some time. And we take this, take it literally. He may have really been to the point where he thinks, he's dragging himself essentially into the camp there where Jacob's at. And because of this, Jacob kind of sees an opportunity. Okay? Now, this also could have been Esau coming in and just saying, I'm so hungry, I'm ready to die. We kind of know that. I do not think that is the case here. And just by reading a couple of the commentaries that I kind of read, that Esau is literally, he's good, probably he's not eaten anything in quite some time. They had a long journey back, or he's maybe had a successful hunt. He's going to carry several things with him, and he's just wore plumb out. He's not eaten something for quite some time, and he sees Jacob, and it probably smells good. Jacob's probably good at cooking this food, probably done it a lot. Probably one of Esau's favorite things is what Jacob is making here. And he sees him and wants some of it and tells him, get that over here, I'm about to pass out. And Jacob sees an opportunity. Or not Jacob. Jacob sees an opportunity that he can kind of take over with. And craftily asked Esau to sell him his birthright. Apparently Jacob appreciated spiritual values, but he attempted to gain them in the wrong ways. He understood the importance of the birthright, but he was trying to gain them in the wrong ways. He should have waited for God to grant him the birthright. Correct? Because when these 2 boys were born, God told Rebekah that was going to be the case, that Jacob would be the one that would get the birthright. And I think that this is Lanseyism, all right? But I would imagine that was a conversation that mother and father would have with these 2 boys. Okay? I don't think they kept them in the dark about it. I would imagine, just because of the way Isaac was a very, very faithful man of God, Rebekah, a very, very faithful woman of God as well, I'm sure there was conversation that they had that when you 2 boys were born, God told me that this was going to be the case. And the reason I say that is because Jacob had a reason to try to deceive Esau. Right? If that conversation would have never happened, then Jacob would have just thought the whole time that, look, Esau gets the birthright, this is the way things go. I think Jacob knows he's supposed to get the birthright, he just wouldn't get it on his time instead of God's time. Okay? So Esau comes in famished, and he tricks Jacob, or just trick him or deceives him, or doesn't really deceive him, but talks him into turning his birthright over. Again, I think Jacob understood the importance of the birthright, he understood the importance of spiritual things, but he wanted stuff done on his time and not God's time. And that's why we have this 5-verse account going on here in Genesis. He wanted it to be done his own way. Jacob was used at conniving to get what God had promised him already, as if gaining the birthright was just a game that he was playing. Okay? Esau said that his birthright would be worthless since he would die if he didn't eat right away anyways. And this is highly unlikely unless he had been out hunting for weeks and weeks and weeks and was really to the point where he had very, very little to eat at all. Esau overstated his problem, and then, as we see in verse 34, despised his birthright, turned it over. Back to verse 31 for just a second, though. As we see in Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." What does Jacob reveal about his understanding of God? Looking at verse 31. What does Jacob reveal about what he thinks about God in verse 31?
God can't give him that.
That he has to intervene in some way to help God's will to be done. Exactly, right? God's got to be helped in some way for his will to come about. And God doesn't care how his will comes about, just as long as it does. Kind of what Jacob's thinking here. Of course, we know that that is not the case. So Esau overstates the problem, talks about verse 34. He says, "Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils. He did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau," it says in the last verse there in verse chapter 25, "despised his birthright." Okay? The wording there is he could give away his birthright or sold his birthright. He specifically used the phrasing there, despised his birthright, because Esau here does not think that his birthright is worth very much. Okay? And go back to verse 32, you can kind of see that, right? And Esau said, "Behold, I'm at the day of thy prophet, shall this birthright be to me anyways?" And which again leads me to think that these two men knew what God had told his mother and father. Esau probably thought, well, you're going to get it anyway, what does it matter, right? If I die, it doesn't matter. You're going to have it anyway, so what does it matter? So we see now Esau here turning over his birthright. Now, for this reason, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 16, and we're running out of time. Let me just finish up. I don't have time to flip over there. But Hebrews chapter 12, verse 16 calls Esau a profane person. Okay? Profanity is the sin of treating lightly and casually what ought to be treated seriously and highly. Alright, so Esau gets called a profane person again because the sin of treating things lightly and casually when things ought to be treated with quite a bit of seriousness. Esau's whole life was profane. Okay? He lived as though spiritual matters were of very little value. And Jacob must have thought that he had settled the matter of the birthright. So God's will was for him to have the birthright, and he had just secured the birthright. So Jacob kind of intervenes here in the will of God, and kind of does things on his own instead of waiting on God's time. Now, as we're going to see as we start chapter 26, some more of this insensitivity, to the will of God, and Rebecca kind of gets upset too. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening here over the next couple of chapters. It's pretty interesting to kind of see. These are very, very, I think this is Abraham, Isaac's not just one generation removed, and not that they were just completely abandoning their values. That's not what I mean, abandoning, but we see quickly how just a couple of decisions couple of decisions where we think that that's what helping things a little bit better causes quite a bit of problems, and can and will cause the same problems for us as well. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson that we have, being able to see these individuals and the way in which they operated, and how, because of the decisions that they made, how their choices had consequences. When we make good choices, we have good consequences. When we make bad choices, we have bad consequences. It's a very, very simple idea, but a very, very complex thing for us to grasp our hold. So Lord, I pray that we make decisions based on your will and ours. Reminded